Welcome back to Ethos of Humanity. I'm joined here again with Tiffany, which I'm very excited about. It's been obviously a very productive week for both of us. For me personally, and kind of tying back into the conversation that we had before, this week I was part of a conference and we were talking heavily about technology and companies being fathered, and how now we're moving into a time with a lot of women in the workspaces and how we need a form of like mothering in these spaces, whether technology, organization, regulation, what have you. And something that we had discussed prior to was talking specifically about nurturing in the workplace. And so thank you again, Tiffany, for joining me. And let's just dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the idea of, like kind of that nurturing in the workplace. And I think, if we think about the work that you do, that I do, that several others in this community and beyond continue to do, it's like bringing that humanity back into the workplace. And that humanity really is that nurturing. It's the mothering, it's the looking after, the caring for. We can come up with a lot of terms around it, but really it all boils down to that exact thing. As we create spaces for more humanity, we create space to actually have these conversations. And they're so important, especially in today's day and age, for sure.
And the more that I mature and I grow and I develop myself within my career, I'm finding that like you don't find one mentor. There are specific mentors for specific reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and it's all about the team, right? I'll give you a really quick example that I just actually came across not too long ago, but I was researching the octopus. Don't ask me why. That's a longer story. But I was researching the octopus. And what I found with the octopus is that it has 3 hearts and it actually has 9 brains. And I was really interested by that, because I'm like, what does it need 9 brains for? And it has 1 central brain and then it has 8 other brains in its legs, because it's actually thinking at the edges. So it's gathering information from 8 different sources to feed the brain. And 2/3 of its intelligence actually comes from those other brains. So only 1/3 is from its central brain. So if we think about that in terms of business, in terms of our own growth and how we travel through the world, having 8 other brains around us to give us information from the edges is really like, it is the blueprint for today's leadership, especially if we talk about change.
Mm-hmm. And always expanding, I guess, her horizons and learning that we are always growing. We'll always be pushing the envelope.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's always going to be a new edge to discover, right?
Yeah. And so just like tying into what we were just talking about before, you had mentioned that you have worked with even just like different types of modalities in like workspaces in regards to like Lego specifically.
Yeah. So I have been on a quest to do things differently my whole life, but mostly and most importantly within my business. I recognized that the things that we were doing were having limited impact. And it didn't make me feel good going into organizations and not being able to leave feeling that there was, a significant shift or a significant learning. So I started researching, what is out there? What can we actually do? And I ran into something called Lego Serious Play. It is a registered trademark program actually discovered by Lego. So it was in the 1990s, the then CEO, Kel Christensen, was getting frustrated with his directors, board leaders, because they were playing it safe. They would go into these strategic sessions and there would be the safe answers, a lot of agreements, and only the loud voices in the room were talking. And he started to get frustrated with that. So he joined forces with a couple of very, very talented people from, I think it was IMD Business School. And in that, he tasked them with coming up with a methodology that he could, deploy within these meetings that would allow creative, unique, really, really strategic thinking and challenge, as well as making sure that everybody in the room contributed. And what came out of that was this methodology called Lego Serious Play. So I decided to go get my certification within Lego Serious Play because it was really intriguing to me. And the science behind it is constructionism. And what that really comes down to is that there is a link between our brain and our hands. And in that, if we are tangibly building something with our hands and we are using our brain to describe it, we are able to unlock thought processes, feelings, and a whole bunch of insights that aren't actually there if we just use our brains. And I've seen it, over and over again as it comes true, like you'll ask a question of a model or, tell me how this particular model that you built represents XYZ. And the answers that you get are definitely more profound than if you just ask it on surface level, kind of face to face without the build involved. So it's been really, really interesting to see others as they go through this process. And also for myself, just as a unique tool to be able to make really difficult things more simple, you build it out. And one of the things that I love about the rules around Lego Serious Play, the best one for me is where one of the rules is if you don't know what to build, just start building. Like just pick up the bricks and start building. And it literally, that is one of the strongest parts of the methodology itself.
It's so fascinating because even talking about the analogy of the octopus, I feel like that ties in very well. But for myself personally, as a photographer, I find that, for myself, working a conference this week, I got a camera in my hand, I'm taking photos. Like I always struggled a lot with focusing in school and really being engaged when I was stuck in a seat. But if I had something to work with my hands, I did find that my engagement and like even just the flow of thought, I found it just came more naturally. And even when it comes to my background being in the service industry, the exact same thing. They even have said that when you work in the service industry, it's almost as if like you're activating your brain the same way as learning another language.
Right? Absolutely. Yeah. I think the different ideas as we learn, we're continuing to learn some really amazing things about our brains today and it's really exciting and intriguing to me. I'm a little bit of a nerd that way, but I think that, as we continue to learn more, I think we're going to find that depending on the style of processing or the types of thoughts that we're trying to engage with, we are going to discover different modalities for each of those paths, and those neural pathways in our brain and how to unlock them and access them way deeper. And it's really, I think that as we build, out of the chaos that we've been through lately as a society, whether it's personal or business, I think all of those modalities are going to be really important for us to really dig into.
Yeah, because as most things, we need to, it's like a wheel, it's consistently spinning.
Absolutely.
And just certain things become outdated or maybe it leads to complacency. So introducing different methods also with different generations, like you've expressed in the last interview, like people respond much differently. And so it's a matter of like tapping into all of it to kind of explore what produces the best results for probably the employees and the greater company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, generations, we're learning so much from these new generations that are joining us in the workplace. And you and I have dived into that topic. But I think the really interesting thing is that they are still iterating. So, like fairly early on, they were able to identify, strong traits within generations. And this most recent generation, they're finding that they're iterating on the go and probably likely to be seen later on as one of the most diverse generations as far as, what they like and how they behave, a lot less. It'll be interesting to see if they can stereotype them, put it that way. It's not easy right now for sure.
Yeah. So even since we last spoke, is there anything that's been, up to date in regards to Beyond Diversity and kind of the things that you've acquired within the last first quarter, I guess, since we last spoke?
A lot. We would probably need about 2 or 3 of these sessions to go through it all. But I'd say most excitingly, Beyond Diversity is going through an identity shift right now. We're rebranding to BDI, the People Company. It is a registered trade name currently, and we're operating as that. And then as we continue the journey to the new organization, we're expanding into Calgary. So I will be split time between Edmonton and Calgary. I'll be living in Calgary as of September for a number of months. to get the company established there. And we're actually in conversations with a few individuals in Portugal as well to see kind of what it looks like to potentially do business globally. So lots has changed. There's so many things on the horizon. Most importantly, though, I think that there's been a shift in my own personal leadership. And, it's interesting for me because I help leaders and teams within organizations. So when it happens the other way around, it's always an interesting journey. And I've just found myself leaning way more into what's the vision, what's the strategy, where are we going, what's the legacy, larger questions, and a little less in the operations, which I love, and it's filling my cup. But it's much different than I think even when you and I spoke in December. Yeah.
That's amazing. I'm so happy to hear that things are expanding even on an international level. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. And then, much of the programs that you had, is there any more that you're expanding on, or is it much of the same that you provide within your services?
Right now, so we had to trim. In order to grow and expand, you have to be really intentional about the work that you're doing while you're growing. And it's kind of a little bit of that, chicken and egg, cart and horse scenario. So we trimmed down our services. So we have 2 signature programs now. So Uncharted, which the trademark was approved on, is running 2-day human skills experiential learning program. And then the Change Ready program is a co-created program with an amazing change practitioner here in this area. And we co-created the Change Ready program, which is actually powered by Lego Serious Play. So that one is around change readiness within organizations. Both programs, and the golden thread through everything that BDI, the people company, is going to be doing is building internal capability within organizations, because we really believe that the future of work is going to demand that organizations are internally capable of doing the hard things themselves without having that external expert, not a word that I love, but the external help on a regular basis. It's too expensive. Margins within businesses are tighter than ever. There's financial challenges in every industry that I talk to. And the idea of hiring external help to get through all of these problems is going to be very expensive. And with the complexity that's coming in, AI is causing different challenges within every industry. Financial challenges are different in every industry. The global markets are causing different complex issues. So not one expert is going to be able to solve all your problems. It's just way too vast now within that space. So focusing on the human skills and the change readiness skills allows us to build that capacity and confidence within organizations so that they can actually have the conversations and open up the creativity to be able to solve their own problems.
Yeah. Give them the tools so that they can take the initiative, and then they have
Absolutely.
everything within their grasp.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big topic that's been coming up lately. It's very interesting, and been thinking a lot about polarities. And I think we were about to touch on that a bit in regards to like nurturing in the workplace. But
Mhm.
even so, when it comes to the implement of AI, I talk to many people in communications role or marketing roles. There's plenty of people that are doing, what would be 5 people's roles into one, just with the implement of AI as one of their extensions of tools that they have within
Absolutely.
their day-to-day use. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, and I mean, it's interesting because I think just like everyone else who studies, kind of the new that's coming up, I think that there's definitely pros and cons to AI. What I do know is it's not going away. And as a society, we have adopted this new tool for our future. So then there's a couple of different ways that we can look at it. We can look at it as, oh, it's really horrible for the environment. And right now, yeah, it's not great. However, if we continue to put our head in the sand, it'll stay not great. So for me, the path is, okay, so how do we make it better? As humans, we haven't been great at coming up with, environmentally friendly solutions. We can talk about oil and gas and all the other industries at length. And however, this is our opportunity to do it different this time. It's a brand new industry. It's a brand new technology that has its challenges. And we can rise to the occasion to solve that, or we can put our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. So the other really awesome news that's coming out of places like the World Economic Forum, so they do their Future of Jobs report every year, and the 2025 version dug into quite a number of things. And one of those things was AI and how it's going to change the workforce. And they have found that it's almost 40% of the skills that we currently have in our workforce are going to be outdated by 2030. We've got 4 years to figure this out. And the skills that they're talking about are the ones that are repeatable. You talk about communications and things like that. Anything that's a repetitive type task that requires low critical thinking or decision making will likely be, kind of first in that succession of change. Now, the other news that came out of World Economic Forum in that particular report was that AI is going to definitely displace jobs, but it is going to create more jobs. So we are going to end at a net positive in that respect. And that's really good news because it means that the economy of the world is not going to shrink because of AI. As long as we continue to do what we need to do, we're going to have different jobs. I remember being in the banking industry when bank machines, I'm going to date myself here really badly, but when bank machines were kind of, like first coming out. And there was this, fear that they were going to take the jobs of all of the tellers. And yeah, that's very true. They did. We have less tellers in banks now. However, it created a net positive of jobs because we needed to transfer money differently. We needed the design of the machines to be done. We needed an update to technology. We needed different security. And so it actually was a net positive in jobs, but they're different jobs. So then what does that mean for us as we are employees looking for roles? It means that we need to upskill ourselves. And that's something that in the past couple of generations, we haven't had to do, not on a large scale anyways. We've been able to say like, hey, this is my role. And I've been able to do this for 10, 15, 20 years with minimal skill development. And now that's just not going to be the case. For anybody that's currently in the workforce, a 40% shift in skill set is quite the learning curve. So the faster we get on that within organizations, the better it'll be for people. But change is coming regardless of whether we want it or not. So.
Yeah, but human to human interaction will always be a requirement in the workplace.
Absolutely.
Particularly as we've touched on before, it's that mentorship piece, that development, like the development piece is crucial. And kind of as you were talking, I was thinking about where is nurturing essential in the workplace? For myself personally, I feel like when I first got into the workforce and I was growing and I was kind of a little fish in a big pond, I think there was a time and a place for it. And as I get mature and I think I have learned to, I guess I realized that I had to parent myself. I realized that self-nurturing comes within. But I do still think that it is necessary. I think if we only had a specific group of people leading in a certain way, it only takes us so far.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the truth of leadership right now is stark. So we are at our lowest point of leadership engagement that we've ever been. I think the numbers like 29% of leaders are engaged. Now, leaders run our organizations and their employees take all of their signals from leaders. About 79%, I think, is what they say. So if we look at those numbers, if we've got only 30% of our leaders engaged in our workforce, we have a problem. And a lot of that can be attributed back to a lack of nurturing, a lack of humanity. Our leaders were meant to know everything, do everything, handle everything, carry everything, support everything. And no one was ever there for our leaders. That has been the case for many, many years. So when you talk about where is nurturing going to come within organizations, immediately my head goes to our leaders. And especially right now in this great time of change, I think when we talk about AI can only ever do what has already happened. As of right now, I'm sure our tech will change quickly, but right now it can only it only can build from what's already happened. Critical thinking skills, decision making, empathy. AI is not capable of these skills. It can't do any of these things. So as we get into fast change, as we start handling more and more complex problems, because that's the human side of business now, we're going to need to support one another. And that's where I think the nurturing is going to come in. And I think what you'll see, to be honest, if I'm allowed to be a little predictive, is that we will be more complex thinkers in the future, but we will also be remarkably more connected as humans in our engagements within our workplaces and our homes.
I'm optimistic about that too. A big topic that had come up in a recent event that I had done is we were talking about like the regulation of AI, and they never touched on it, but something I think that is crucial is the self maintenance in regards to our interaction with AI too.
Absolutely.
Knowing
Yeah.
like when to use it and when to use our critical brain so that we can work in harmony with it and it doesn't just completely, take over our operating systems. I think that it has a function, but it's knowing its place and its purpose.
And that takes talking about it, right? So, I mean, like I had mentioned earlier, we can stick our heads in the sand and, regardless of how we feel about it, and we could either use it for everything or we could use it for nothing. But both of those remove that self-regulation. If we stick our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist, then we lack the skill sets that are going to be required. And I mean, are already required in many, many roles. I think 55% of organizations have AI adoption right now. That's a remarkable number, considering it wasn't even a topic of conversation, 2 to 3 years ago. So, but at the same time, if we adopt it for everything, we lose our cognitive function. And now we can't actually even operate. I mean, depending on which stories are true, and what you listen to, there are human beings that are having relationships with AI because AI is regurgitating back to them exactly what they want to hear. And it's actually causing some real mental health crisis within our world. And I know that the statistics are alarming in that case because of that lack of connection, that lack of humanity. So when we go back to, the idea of nurturing, if we continue down the path of intentionally building that human connection and nurturing within all parts of our life, the reliance on AI to fill that gap will reduce. And then we'll start to see, the negative mental health impacts, reduce as well. But we have to be open and honest with our conversations in order for that to happen.
Yeah.
And we have to be willing to do the work.
I do think it's funny how there may be specific leaders that are very direct and blunt, and how you can insert into AI and it can kind of soften the blow, perhaps, and how in the delivery. And I hope that within organizations they're able to use that, and hopefully it can be a bit of a buffer when it comes to getting into those hard conversations. But it still requires of us to put in that work.
Absolutely. I mean, garbage in, garbage out. It's the same as, I mean, we've heard it in so many different places, right? But it allows people to learn a new skill set in a very safe way. So if you do have a leader that has received feedback, like you're too blunt or you're not empathetic enough, they can partner with AI to start building those types of communications. And as AI spits them out messages, when used properly, they'll be iterating it and they'll be learning. They're like, oh, this is what an empathetic, caring, communication looks and feels like. And it'll become more natural as they continue. And then they won't need it to build that skill. So using it can also just build other skill sets that we honestly wouldn't have access to in some cases.
That's a great point. Yeah, yeah. I was going to ask a specific question, but it's slipping from my mind here. It'll come back to me. But yeah, I am very optimistic about the future. I am very curious to see what the job market is going to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting as we try and figure out. I mean, the cool part is it can be whatever we design it to be. Like we are at this place post COVID, and I think you and I have touched on this before, where for not very many generations, we have had this idea of being able to create our own future. If I think about my grandparents and my mother, they were born, they were raised, they went into jobs, they continued to go to work, they retired, and now they're, kind of living happily at the end of their lives. But we had so much turmoil and so much chaos and so many things disrupted that we have the opportunity to design what our lives look like for the first time in a long time. And I mean, I'm hopeful that as a society we take that opportunity seriously and don't spend too much energy in the fear of change and trying to return back to how things were, because how things were isn't going to work tomorrow. It really isn't. We're seeing that even in the back to work legislation and, all of those types of things. There's a great resistance to going back because it wasn't working for so many people, and the newer generations just simply won't.
Yeah,
So,
and how we're seeing the distribution of, like, labor inflation. We definitely see that people aren't willing to invest time into something that isn't actually benefiting them.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, our values shifted. Like there's a large complex layering system that goes on when there's great big shifts like this. That you can't usually point it to one thing. And this is no different. The value shifts in COVID, the newer generations, the mental health of those in Gen X and baby boomers starting to become a topic that they could talk about. I mean, even if we think about women's health and menopause, there's so many things. Like, for how many years did women
Yeah.
hide in organizations? For how many years did women suffer great career downfalls towards the end of their careers because of menopause? And now we're talking very openly about it in so many different places that now they're like, I'm not going to put up with that anymore. I'm not going to lose my career because of this. This is something we can talk about, and this is something we can work through. So even those little shifts are giving us the ability to start designing. And I think that, while scary sometimes, I think this is an opportunity that we just shouldn't pass up.
I
We really
agree.
shouldn't.
And even women having the kind of the words behind all these things, whether it's perimenopause or menopause, or even, like, I explained it to someone recently about, like, a certain phase in my cycle, and this was someone that was like, I didn't have the words when I was growing up.
Right?
So, I mean, yeah, for it to be common knowledge and for us to normalize it, particularly
Absolutely.
working in harmony, as you had discussed much within your programming about honoring the different phases in people's lives and really incorporating that into workspaces.
Absolutely. I went to a menopause mission event. I can't remember what they called it. And there was someone there that actually was teaching women how to plan their activities and their work around their cycles, just like what you were talking about, because certain cycles bring fatigue, certain cycles bring, brain fog and things that they need to work with. So if we actually work in harmony with that system, we're more productive than if we are constantly trying to fight it. So being able to just have that conversation in the workplace allows the employers to get the best out of their employees. It allows the employees to be able to work at their best. So, I mean, overall, it becomes a win-win situation every single time.
Mhm. It's less performative and more authentic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we flip that to the male side, because I mean, like they've also got, issues with how things are designed. Men historically have been ATM machines for families. They've not been allowed to have emotions. And so now, I mean, if you think about a male leader having a really hard day and their, kid is in the hospital, they're allowed to verbalize that now. So you go into the workplace and you're like, hey, I'm just having a really bad day. It doesn't mean that they're going to perform less. I mean, maybe a little bit because they're slightly distracted, but the amount of support that they will get from their team will actually increase performance because the team will step up. The tightness and the connection within the humans will ensure that that leader is supported, and there's no masking. So the energy that is left besides that of caring for a son or daughter in the hospital means that now they can actually function with that cognitive ability at work,
Mhm.
instead of trying to hide it all and spending energy, putting on faces and pretending nothing's wrong. So, the ability to be human allows all of us to grow and to be just better every day.
Mhm. Yeah, and I'd be very curious with your history working in a lot of male dominant industries. And I'd imagine you probably have had some success stories working with specific, groups or breakthroughs where that very maternal approach has created that very humanizing, connective ability to kind of help progress an organization or a company.
Absolutely. And I think that, there's a lot of resistance still. I mean, you got to remember these are values and behaviors and mindsets that have been in place for decades. Like, we're not going to fix it overnight. But there are some, if we think about, even the change model, there's early adopters, right? And that's kind of where we're at right now in this whole human, elevating moment in business. And telling a leader, whether male or female, because our leaders have had to be very stoic in the past, telling them that they're allowed to be vulnerable and then walking out of the room isn't quite the right approach because they don't even know how. They don't have the language for it. Just like we didn't have language to talk about our cycles and menopause at work, they don't have the language to talk about emotions at work. I'm distracted. I'm not quite there. I think that this is how I'm feeling, but I'm not sure. Whatever it is, it takes practice, but we have to create safe places for that to happen. And we have to stop judging people and accept with grace and empathy that this is a very human experience, whatever it is that we're talking about. And once we start those conversations, we get away from policies. We're not talking about, parental leave versus maternal leave. Like all of those things go out the window. And we just start talking about the human experience behind it. Without judgment, it opens up so many doors very, very quickly. And, it puts everyone on a journey. And it is a journey. It doesn't change overnight, but all of those small steps lead to something better tomorrow,
Yeah.
for sure.
I'm really meditating a lot on what you said about the yes and like the nuance and sitting between both. And I think there's an edge to that that's so crucial. What would you suggest for like a CEO, a president, a manager, even for yourself, being in that juxtaposition where you have someone that, is going through a personal struggle, but you also need, someone to fulfill a role to,
Absolutely.
how do you bridge the gap between the two?
And I think it depends on the situation. I mean, like there's short term and long term, like in the short term, it's, like when do you think you'll be able to do your best work again kind of thing? Like what can you do today versus tomorrow? What does that look like? Having really transparent conversations, like, and maybe it's, I can't do anything right now. And it's like, okay, well then let's put you on leave and let's backfill your position so that you can go concentrate on what you need to concentrate on. And we'll keep things running afloat until you get back. There's that level of support and conversation. And then there's also, like, hey, these things are happening between these times for the next 5 days. I just need to check out, but I'll work, maybe between 9 and 11 p.m. to make sure that my work gets done, and it's a different type of conversation where we talk about support and nurturing and accountability to what still needs to get done. And it's never going to be one size fits all, but we need to, develop that skill to be able to have those tough conversations. And once we start having them, they're actually really not that hard. It's just a matter of learning the skill of empathy and working collaboratively to figure out who needs what at what time.
Yeah.
I can tell you I work with my CEO, my COO, and it's really funny because in the beginning, there were days where she's like, oh my God, my kid's sick. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it's fine. What do we need? I'm like, I'll go through the list and I need this, this, and this done by this date. Can you still do that? Or do we need to shift? And it's about having really good conversations as opposed to historically, it'd be like, your butt is not in your chair for these 8 hours between 9 and 5. That is not a productive conversation for the employee or for the business. A butt in the chair does not equal value. So shifting mindsets around what's valuable for the organization, getting really clear about accountabilities. And this will all take time because a lot of organizations aren't even set up that way.
Yep. Because I think of a wide variety of scenarios. I think about, personal crisis, let's say a maternity leave. Or, for example, I worked in a few different environments where we've got young, very influential young adults, particularly the Gen X and the Gen Alpha generation. And I see a lot in like different settings is like there's, what is it? Kind of like the young ones, the young kids that are still in development. There's almost like less of a bandwidth of compassion. I feel like, particularly for myself, when I was a young adult, I was very sensitive to criticism, but I wanted to perform and I wanted to impress. Because I would say, I'd be very curious what your assessment is on like the ratio of people that are actually not willing to do that accountability. I'd imagine it's very small.
It is. Absolutely. It's small. When we get work that's truly value added, and I think that's some of what we're seeing, because I have had pushback on this. People have said, well, no, they don't want to work. That's not the case. They don't want to do the work that you're asking them to do because it's meaningless. Like there's this idea of performative. And I think that that's what people are tired of. They don't want to do things just to do things or because I said so. Like those aren't answers anymore. So it's like, what work is going to bring value? What can I be proud of? Where is the impact? What am I actually doing within this organization when I spend my time there? And those are the conversations that need to start happening within companies so that employees do start stepping up. And what we expect of people is how they will behave. That's been proven time and time again. I remember watching a video of a teacher, and I believe it was quite controversial at the time, but she had two groups of students in her class. And I don't remember all the details, but one of them, she told them that they were the smartest group in the class. The other one, she told they were literally like the least smart of the group. And I think she used quite harsh words. And she did this social experiment and she ran a couple of cognitive type testing on both groups. And the group that she told was the smartest elevated. They, performed really well. They proved that they were the smartest. And all of a sudden, the ones that were told that they weren't their behavior started shifting. Their testing went down. And then she switched the groups. They came in one day and she's like, now you're the smartest group and you're the least smart group. And then she did that. And when she did that and started running the same tests, the scores flipped.
It's a frequency. And I see this in a lot of different industries. If you're, putting people into lack or kind of feeling like they're never enough, and like if they are trying to reach a marker and they literally have shot as high to the stars as they can, but they're still left in lack, it does something to the psyche. And I mean, you can't butter people up to the point where like, they have nothing to work towards. But like, where do we bridge the gap on that? There's got to be a good in between where they still are given, I guess, tasks and goals that are achievable, rewarded for that, also not pigeonholed as well. Because I find the accountability is still on that leadership end where they're not just keeping people spinning their tires and not able to reach tangible goals that make them feel successful.
Absolutely. And I think you just nailed it right there. That make them feel successful. It's not my idea of success. It's not your idea of success. It's their idea of success. So we have, employees within our organizations that love doing the same and becoming the expert at doing the same thing all of the time. They want all of the data. They want all of the details. They want to dive as deep as they can, and they want to hone all of those skills. They're not interested in climbing corporate ladders. Mm-hmm. They want to be the best, pick something that they can be. Now, there's other people that want to elevate and they're constantly looking for new challenges, new different ways of thinking, new ideas, new skill sets. And I think as leaders, we really need to start paying attention to that. Historically, as a society, we were happy, this is your role. This is what you're going to do. The corporation, the company, the organization told us this is your role. And if we, happen to be identified as someone good for this, then maybe we got to move. But now that's not going to be good enough in the future. People are going to be looking and striving. This new generation this is what I want. These are my boundaries, and this is what I'm going to look for. And that's going to be a wide variety of things. It's not going to be one or two things. So organizations that are best adaptable to like that level of variety are going to be the ones that have access to the most employees as we continue forward. And it's about having different conversations with a little bit of a different mindset. It doesn't mean anyone's working less. In fact, designed properly, they'll probably work more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I find too, something that popped up in my head is that I think we all like strive to maybe compete a little bit in certain seasons of our lives, and
Absolutely.
be very goal focused. But also I believe that there's certain points in our lives where we want positive participation, which shouldn't be confused with complacency. I think there's people that come into work, they're not there to shoot for the stars. They're there to get the job done, feel like they had a successful day. They want to make their bosses happy, but they're not trying to win the race. And I think there's a place for that in leadership. I think for appreciating those employees for just showing up.
Yeah, exactly. And they're really the anchors within teams. And often the way that we have performance reviews, we'll do a whole other podcast on that. Because the way that we do performance reviews, we often, in so many cases, will reward those that are overshooting all the time. And I say overshooting on purpose because most of the people that are getting rewarded at the highest levels within those performance reviews are the ones that are very close to burnout. Because they're constantly doing more and more and more and adding more, that next 2%, that next 2%, because we don't actually within our teams reward those that are the anchors. They will always be, oh, you're a flat performer. You just did what you did. But we don't recognize the importance and the value that they bring to the team. If we had a team comprised of always the 2%ers that were reaching, how would we ever keep things calm? How would we ever keep things steady? How would the work actually get done? Because no one would be paying attention to today. They'd all be shooting for the stars tomorrow. So I think that when we think about how we reward human behavior within organizations, we have to reward all of the different functions that make up a team. And that once we understand, like, oh, Tiffany is a really good anchor. Now let's reward her for her ability to be an anchor, not her ability to shoot for the stars, because that's not how she wants to perform. And I think we'll come up with a lot better, stronger, more cohesive teams that actually produce loads more than what we're getting out of people right now. Yeah.
Because I think it's the consistency that, a lot of businesses want, but it's like they almost want consistency of high achievers, but it's not sustainable.
No, it's not sustainable for the high achievers. We've got like almost an epidemic of burnout right now. People are cooked. And not just leaders, people within organizations. There is so much going on between personal lives and work lives and change and expectations and the influx of information and now new skills. And we need to make space for people to be human. We need to make space for the nurturing. We need to literally make space for all of that. And expecting high achievement and, these exceptional performance reviews every half year isn't the way that we're going to do that.
No, I find it so interesting. I mean, we could talk forever about it. How do you token the terms within a business and an organization? You mentioned anchor, you mentioned like high performer. Is there any other terms that you think are very applicable to, an organization, a corporation?
I think that, some of it depends on the industry. We want to use language that's familiar enough that it doesn't scare people away and that they can actually rally behind. But I think one of the ones that's coming up a lot right now in my work, especially in the change space, is this idea of a resistor. And I've been actively advocating against that term and turning it more into something like challenger. And the reason that I say that is because we found in our work with change specifically that people that come across as resisting a lot of the time are either trying to optimize the process or to make it more efficient. They're searching for something a little bit better. So they're saying like, hey, you're asking for this change, but what if? And they're being labeled as resistors because they're not just accepting it and moving on. And that's not the case. And it's also not fair to the organization nor to the person that's, really trying to do it. Someone that's asking those questions, that's really, in that space of challenger, cares way more deeply than those that are just going along and nodding and smiling. And that level of care is your indication about how engaged that employee is. So I've been working with organizations that are following this model of resistor and really just kind of challenging that mindset to be more like, what about challenger? Because a challenger has the positive side a lot. It's seen a lot more than on the resistor side being just fully negative.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot because it's an asset to have someone that cares about the business, the organization, the corporation for the amount that they do.
Absolutely.
They're losing sleep over it and they're willing to have the hard conversations and go to battle for it.
Yep. And whether they're right or wrong, that level of care is engagement, and we have companies that are like, our engagement scores are so low, and we could talk about that all for days too, but your engagement is the care, and the care is people that are speaking up that are like, hey, but what about, and why are we doing this? And it's worth listening and teasing it out. Does it take a little bit of effort? Yes, because we haven't been taught to have those conversations. The people that are challenging don't know how to do it in a way that is productive because we've never taught them. Those that are listening also have not had to listen, and dig out the little nuggets of information that are coming so that together they can form that collaborative piece of solution that inevitably is in that conversation. There will be a solution. They just have to do the work together. And we're not used to that.
Mm-hmm. Let's dive in a little bit to engagement. Because it's
Mhm.
true. I mean, like, what is that cliche saying where it's like any publicity is good publicity, At the end of the
Right?
day,
Yeah.
engagement, right? So it can come up in a multitude of different ways. Like an emotional reaction clearly is a form of engagement.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think and it's funny that we're talking about this today. I'm doing a summer webinar on this because it's come up so often. Organizations are like, our employee engagement is so low. And then I'm like, based on what? And they're like, oh, our engagement survey. And I'm like, okay, so the annual engagement survey that is measuring conditions 12 to 18 months ago in many organizations. The lag time between that means that you're actually basing things on historical information and not real-time information. They also measure happiness. They actually don't measure engagement. And I've seen results change due to pizza parties. Like I'm not even lying. Leaders will be like, hey, we're gonna have a pizza party and we're gonna do our engagement survey. If you're like, oh, I'm eating pizza and I'm happy and I'm going to answer positive to all these questions, we need to start measuring differently within organizations so that we can actually get an idea of the human conditions that all of these performance numbers are coming from. So, and that's the whole idea behind the engagement survey a long time ago was trying to do just that. And they are the best that we have right now. But as we continue to move forward, it's not going to be good enough. We need real-time information. So if I think about some of the things that we can measure, candor rate, which is like a subset of psychological safety. So how safe is it for me to come to you as my boss and say, hey, I don't like this?
Yeah.
And as my boss, how safe is it for you to come to me and say, hey, Tiffany, your performance isn't cutting it? So that level of trust that's built within the organization, and that's where it's like a little offshoot of psychological safety. It not only requires psychological safety, it requires trust.
Yeah.
So candor rate's one of them. There's decision-making quality. It's actually something that I incorporated into Uncharted for this very reason, is that we are asked to make very high stakes decisions on a regular basis. And no one ever taught us how to make decisions. It's not part of any curriculum that I'm aware of. So if we don't know how to make decisions, yet they are the most critical action that we take every day, we might need to do some work in that space. And the quality of our decisions affects the quality of the work, affects the quality of the business
Huge
and its bottom line,
fact.
right? So there's so many things around engagement that we have just adopted without putting a lot of critical thought into it. And once you figure out that your engagement surveys are a year behind and they're affected by pizza parties, you start kind of rolling your eyes and wondering, like, why are we putting so much effort and time and money into them?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. Even like a written one, right? Like, as you said, it's more of like you're basing it on a meter of like being unhappy, neutral to extremely happy. And then once again, leading to trust is that an open conversation with the group. And what level of trust do you have within the organization for people to come together to have that conversation in person?
Absolutely. Yeah. And they're often tied to like things like financial bonuses and stuff. So, and as soon as you start doing that, you're skewing the information right off the bat. So, if engagement surveys are used for leadership performance and the results of those surveys determine a leader's bonus or pay in some way, now you've lost all credibility in the information that you're gaining because it will be manipulated, whether that's on the leadership side or the employee side. It'll be weaponized in some cases. So I think that, sometimes it's how we use the information and not necessarily the information we're getting. So I think that there's a lot of improvement that we can talk about around engagement. And it's interesting because I think it was Gallup, and I might be wrong there, but one of the large reputable organizations lately did a survey around engagement, and our engagement is lower than it's ever been, and not only just for managers but overall. So, and they deemed it to be in all of their work. They know that a disengaged employee costs an additional 34% of their salary in that disengagement. So right now, with the global level of disengagement in our workplaces, it's costing us $8.9 trillion.
And the last time we spoke, the answer isn't just turnover because that also costs a dollar as well.
Yeah. Exactly. So turnover, at least as a spreadsheet line item in most organizations' financial strategies, disengagement is on nobody's. So if we think about like the world is in critical financial state right now. I mean, whether we talk about inflation and tariffs and all of these things, $8.9 trillion could do us a lot of good. So if all we all did was take a 1% shift to becoming more engaged, how much money would that equal globally? Like the amount that we could do with that money would be, it's almost unbelievable that we're there. And it's not a tracked number. The research company did the research, but the organizations themselves aren't tracking it. So that's productivity lost every day, every hour, every time they try to operate. There's money being, bled.
And do you feel that, through like your exposure, do you think it's just like emotional engagement within these leaders that ignites something within them?
I think there's a lot. It's a very complex problem. I mean, part of it is emotional, but part of it's also, what's happening in their personal life and how the organization is responding to it. Like I have seen leaders who are in personal life crises that are still fully engaged at work because of how they feel seen, heard, and valued. And they're willing to go above and beyond because they're seen, heard, and valued. And then they have that conversation. This is what I can do today. This is what I can't do today. And that bringing in that humanity is the number one way to bring back engagement. There's no fancy program. I mean, like I could blow Uncharted up, but it's not going to work. Engagement has to come from seen, heard, and valued. And that's going to look different for everybody.
Because it's
Just as different as our fingerprints is how we see, seen, heard, and valued. So it's
such
going to be up
personal
to like
experience.
senior leaders, down to middle managers are going to need to do the work to figure out what seen, heard, and valued is for their employees.
I wanted to add too, when it comes to the engagement and the cost of engagement, I think too, when it comes to that quick turnover and, just putting numbers to employees, that also has, I think, a detriment to the ripple effect of other employees feeling unengaged.
Absolutely, it does. Because if we're all just numbers and you'll accept it, it's interesting because I had a conversation with a leader. It was a CEO. We were talking about engagement and turnover. And their comment to me was, well, our turnover is industry average, which in this particular industry was, I think it was close to 9%.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. I'm like, and here's the dollar value. It was something like, I don't know, it was like 3 point something million dollars. And I'm like, so that's okay because it's industry average. Like we've gotten like, again, like there's a human element missing to this, right? That turnover of 9% means that you are spinning out this number of humans. Like what is happening within your organization to make that happen? And why, as leaders, are we okay with industry? Like, I can't even believe there's such a thing as industry average for turnover.
Yeah.
Like we should be aspiring to reduce that number to as low as possible in every organization, regardless of industry. But the whole idea of good enough is good enough, it needs to go. And it's hurt a lot of our organizations. If we're accepting that 9% turnover is going to be a line item on our spreadsheet, then we're not doing very good as an organization and in how we're running our businesses. It's not a very sound strategy,
Yeah.
But historically, that being said, engagement meant throwing more money at employees. So I think that's where we started to slide, is that it was like, okay, so it's going to cost us whatever, $3.2 million in turnover. But in order to reduce that turnover, we're going to have to give X number of bonuses to every single employee and so it's always been a money versus money game. Whereas now I think if we start changing that mindset to the seen, heard, valued, I don't think that there's going to be a money versus money. I think that a lot of conversations, so if you think about whatever, an hour's worth of a leader's pay to sit down with their employees is not going to be the same line item as turnover.
I think so. Another example that I've kind of interpreted recently too is I think there's certain leaders that see someone that makes, a specific salary that's quite generous, maybe perhaps compared to, the team that works under them. And it's interesting how sometimes there's almost this expectation. There's that lack of compassion to say,
Yeah.
hey, you're going to get this wage, you're going to get your standard bonus, and I'm not going to give you the mentorship tools, or I'm not going to give you the time and the energy because I have these expectations of you. That I think has such a trickle down and ripple effect too.
It does. It absolutely does. And I mean, like some of our labor code doesn't help in that space either. I can't remember which provinces still have it, but there's a number of provinces that state that if you are in a salaried leadership position, that you are to take phone calls after hours, So, I mean, like some of those expectations, have been derived from our own laws and policies. And then, of course, like that becomes, interpretation and the rest of it. But we really got away from job descriptions that describe the skills required and the tasks that need to be done. We started just bulking everything into sundry duties as assigned, all of these things, and that's left it open so that your job is dictated by whoever's leading you that day, which isn't good for engagement either, because you'll never reach the bar because there actually isn't a defined bar.
Yeah.
So now you've got, personal boundaries being potentially, stepped on top of how do I ever exceed expectations when the expectations change every 5 minutes and nothing is actually
I've
documented.
seen that before too, where there's a lack of consistency across the board. So it just creates a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, add on top of that, our leaders today, a lot of them, I don't know the percentage, but a lot of them were moved into leadership because they were great at their job. So, like Tiffany's amazing at flipping burgers. She's going to be amazing at leading people flipping burgers. That is not a true statement. The skills that it takes to flip burgers are vastly different than the skills that it takes to lead people. So we took these technical skills, said you're going to be great at leading these technical skilled people without any support.
Yeah.
Where's the people leadership part? Where's the skill development in managing people and finding that line between nurture and accountability? And, like none of those were ever taught. So they look to the people that they know or that they admire, and that could be vastly different in skill sets, right? So even our leaders were put into positions that very many of them weren't actually even skilled for.
Yeah. Yeah. I know there's plenty of instances where people were like the best candidate at the time. And
Hmm.
also, too, I've seen a lot of roles too, people wearing different hats at different times doesn't mean like, as I think the vision is always making someone very well rounded, whatever that field is, but they might not be
It just, yeah,
fit. And I
absolutely.
find that so interesting as well because you can end up making that employee feel like they've been set up for failure.
Yeah, absolutely. It does nobody any good to put somebody into a role that they're not actually skilled for. It is a lose-lose versus asking them to stay where they're at because they're exceptional at it and then creating, different types of motivations, different types of bars that they can reach within that role without actually having to move to a different role.
Mhm. Wonder. So when does the rebranding, like when does that all finalize?
That's unsure right now. It turns out that's a really long journey. It's going to take some time. We will be co-branded for at least the next little while as we finalize the legal aspect, the accounting aspect, some of those things. And then it'll be what does the marketing slash, like the new logo, like all of that has to be designed still. BDI, the people company, is 100% the future. How we actually start showing that to the world will take a little bit of work. I anticipate probably 12 to 18 months, to be honest, before we're fully flipped. Part of it was my own mistake and error. When I started Beyond Diversity, I didn't have the foresight, 7 years ago to say I want to be a CEO. It was like I want to have my own company. So Beyond Diversity and Tiffany Connauton are very much, one and the same. And in order to have a proper enterprise level organization, the CEO cannot be in the picture. So I need to remove myself. But a lot of the organization, even as far as our social media was built around me. So there's some careful considerations that have to be done. There's relationships that I value so deeply, and I'm not willing to give those up just to flip a brand. So if it ends up taking, 18 months because we're nurturing through relationships and we want to make sure we manage those with our clients, then that's what it takes. For me, the idea is making sure that our current clients and our future clients know what we stand for, where our values are, and then what the vision is for the future, and then how we can help them, and the rest of the work will come.
Yeah. And congratulations. And I don't doubt that it's going to be a massive success once it's completely rolled out.
I will definitely need a vacation.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Speaking of nurturing,
Yeah.
there'll be a little bit of that to come for sure.
So, for anyone in the audience that isn't familiar with Tiffany's work, you can find her at beyonddiversity.com. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I know we'll have a follow up and get more future updates.
Absolutely. Sounds fantastic. Thanks so much, Katanya. It's always wonderful to visit with you.
Yeah, likewise.